So this session is session 5. We're moving along through the semester, and with this session we're going to talk about metadata. So far this semester we started out by looking at sort of where 670 fits in the big picture of the iSchool curriculum and also your training as information professionals, and how 670 sort of looks at the interaction between people, information, and information systems, with an especially great emphasis on characteristics of the information itself, whereas people are sort of more examined through 650 and 601. For those of you in the MLS track. And then the technology of information systems is more looked at in LBSC 690. So this is 670, and we're really focused on information and how it relates to people and how people look for it and how information systems can help people look for it. So metadata really gets at the heart of that. We've spent some time understanding the characteristics of information users and information needs in the information seeking process. So we now have a pretty decent appreciation for how information seeking works in general, and also for how complex and sort of multifaceted information needs can be. Then we went on to learn about the philosophical and psychological underpinnings of information science so that we could appreciate kind of where all of this is coming from and what some of the overarching issues are. We get a lot more practical in the previous lecture about information storage and retrieval systems, ISARs, and also in this lecture about metadata, and in the lectures and sessions that are to come down the pike, beginning with databases. For this session, we are going to talk about metadata and some of the characteristics of metadata, how it gets created, what we look at, and then you'll do some activities so that you can see how metadata are applied, and you can start picking that apart a little bit. So we always like to start out with a nice definition, right? And you've seen this definition before, but I'll read it again. Metadata is defined by the authors of your textbook, Taylor and Jowdry, is structured information that describes the attributes of information resources for the purposes of identification, discovery, selection, use, access, and management. Let's take another look at this definition, which we've seen before, and we're going to let it frame our understanding of metadata for this session. We're going to unpack it and examine it in some detail. First things first, the first word of metadata is meta, right? We have some definitions of what meta means from Merriam-Webster. The ones that I selected out here were definition 1C, later or more highly organized or special form. And then definition 3, more comprehensive, transcending, usually used with the name of a discipline to designate a new but related discipline designed to deal critically with the original one. For example, meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is a research project that performs a statistical or qualitative analysis of several different research studies on the same topic. So a meta-analysis of studies of the effect of a certain drug on people who have a specific disease will then sort of coalesce, like all the studies that have been done, maybe on different populations of people with the disease, or people who took the drug for different amounts of time, or people who took the drug at different points in the development of the drug. A meta-analysis of those drug studies would then say, over all of these studies, here are the trends that we see that sort of pervade the different settings of the particular study. So a meta-analysis is an analysis of different analyses. Meta-discourse is discourse, like the writing in a book or article or some words near the beginning of a speech or lecture that describes how the rest of the discourse will be framed. If you've ever read the introduction chapter of a textbook, it usually breaks down what kinds of contents are going to be in which chapters of the book. And then it'll also tell you what some of the typological and formatting conventions mean in the book, such as Illustrative vignettes or anecdotes will be in italicized type inside a box. That kind of stuff would be meta discourse that's put near the beginning of the book to tell you what the format of the book means. Metacognition is thinking about thinking, like when you observe your own thought processes. So when we look at the definition of meta, and we look at some other meta concepts, we start to get a little more perspective and information out of the previously useless definition of metadata as data about data. I think that definition, data about data, can be useful, kind of, but you have to already know what it means in order for it to be useful to you. So it's not useful in providing a new definition of metadata, but in discussing metadata with people who already kind of know what it is, then maybe it's useful as a conversation piece. Now, here's why metadata is important to us in 670. We use metadata to describe information resources. Great, but we don't just do that arbitrarily. Taylor and Jowdry tell us that metadata is structured information. The structure means that there are procedures for creating metadata in different environments. That's part of what we do, is we as information professionals help to create, maintain, or modify those procedures according to the needs of the organization or the user community. Part of the structure comes from defining metadata schemas, which you will read about in your textbook and which we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. So, metadata can be created by any or all of several different players in the sort of publication and information retrieval and use process. Metadata is created by authors when they put a title on a resource, if they put chapter titles or section headings in a resource. Sometimes authors even assign keywords or descriptors to their own work. This often happens in scholarly publishing when you submit for something to be published in a journal. The journal editors have you select descriptors from a pre-existing list, a controlled vocabulary, of acceptable subject descriptors for that journal, and then you would select the descriptors that apply to your particular article. So authors create metadata. Publishers create metadata when they write the matter that goes in a book jacket or on the back of the book, the summary of what the book is about, or the about the author summary. Publishers also create summaries and blurbs that go in catalogs and promotional and marketing materials. Publishers also set the price, which becomes metadata that gets attached to the book. Information professionals, of course, create metadata, especially when we assign call numbers and do classification tasks, when we assign descriptors and subject headings, and when we fill out any of hundreds of possible elements and all the different kinds of metadata schemas that we might use in our individual work settings as information professionals. Computer algorithms assign metadata. Computer algorithms can assign keywords just by sort of looking through the text or by comparing the text of an information resource with a controlled vocabulary. So sometimes computer algorithms take a shot at cataloging. They do relatively well. We won't get a lot into that this semester, but it does happen, but I think we're still better. And we also still need to be there to create the controlled vocabularies that the computers would use for their cataloging. Computers can also easily create or indexes that allow information resources to be found by following different avenues. There can be an index that points from different publication dates to information resources that were published on that date. Another very common type of index in web search engine environments is just a straight up, it's called a bag of words index, where every non-stop word, with stop words being things like a, and the, but every non-stop word of every document that's on the web is in an index in a search engine that points to all the web pages that have that word. So Google has an index that includes the word metadata that points to all the words, or that points to all the web pages that have been crawled by Google's crawler and identified as having metadata in the text of the web page. And finally, metadata is created by end users. One of the discussion topics that you guys can participate in for this session has to do with whether it's a good idea or not a good idea for end users to be creating metadata. And this happens in these kinds of environments where you're reading something on the web and you are allowed to contribute to the content of that resource by tagging it or creating comments on it. So whether or not that's a good idea is a pretty hot item for debate in sort of the library and information science world. And I'd like to hear on the discussion boards where you guys fall on that topic. Now, about these kinds of metadata that are created by different users or by different stakeholders in the publication process. All of these metadata that are created by authors, publishers, information professionals, computer algorithms, and end users, they meet that structure requirement that was in the metadata definition from the previous slide. They meet that structure requirement because in order for the metadata to be created, there has to be some mechanism in place by which the metadata can be created. You can't have computer-generated keywords until you tell the computer what to generate and how to do it. If there's no such thing as a chapter title, then an author can't submit a chapter title to his or her publisher because the publisher doesn't have the equipment to handle that information. You can't have tags applied to a photo on Tumblr until tagging is enabled by the account holder. And even before that, before tagging is built into the functions of the Tumblr website, including all of the technical details that make it possible, say, for a text box to be on the page into which users can type and submit text. And then that same text will be attached to the photo and can only be deleted by the person who posted the photo or the person who posted the tag. So I really did want to emphasize what Taylor and Jowdery were talking about with that definition that metadata is structured information that describes the attributes of information resources. That information can come from all sorts of avenues, but it's not really going to have anything to stick to unless there's a structure. And we're going to find out later that that structure can often be referred to as a metadata schema.